You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, always free and available on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. With the only Chris Level, I'm Casey Cowan. Chris, great to be back with you and happy to be joined by a special guest as we're going to dive into a new member of the Big 12 Conference, that being the Arizona Wildcats. They are on the schedule for Texas Tech this year as the Red Raiders will head to Tucson. It's Troy Hutchison of GoAZCats.com, part of the Rivals Network, and we began our conversation with Troy basically backtracking over a very recent season gone by where they were very competitive at 10-3, posting a great mark. But then you get into the offseason and you have a coaching change. And to say the least, that kept things very, very interesting there in Tucson.
Yeah, it's never a dull moment here in Tucson. It seems like something's always going on. And yet again, you have a roster turnover and coaching changes and athletic department changes. It's nonstop out here in the desert.
Troy, take us through the coaching change. And let me go, I guess, before that. Was last year's 10-3 season expected, kind of off the radar? I mean, kind of take us through the dynamic that was a really good year for the Wildcats, and then take us into the coaching change and fans frustrated, glad, upset. I mean, so let's just kind of go through last year if you can.
Yeah, I think going into the season, seeing what Arizona's roster had with Jayden de Laura at the helm, you thought Arizona can finish anywhere from 7 to 8 wins, maybe 6 wins if things didn't go their way. But as the season started to take shape, Jayden de Laura goes down with the injury against Stanford. Noah Fifita comes in and shines right away. I think he only had 89 yards passing in that game, but he didn't make a mistake. He led the team to a game-winning touchdown drive. They're able to hold on in that game, and then they picked up momentum against Washington, USC, in very close losses, and from that point on, it was full steam ahead. And what's funny about that is Jayden de Laura doesn't get hurt. Noah Fifita doesn't enter the game. Noah Fifita really doesn't see the field this past season. And the whole entire outlook of what Arizona football was that season probably changes from a team that's 10-3 and beating Oklahoma in a major bowl game to a team that is hovering around that 5 to 7 win mark and fighting for a playoff or bowl push, I should say. So, you look at what they were able to do. They were able to dominate the line of scrimmage, both offensively and defensively. And it was one of those runs where you didn't feel like any of it was a fluke. It was very well coached, very well attacked from the offense and defensive line, and just a perfect mix at a perfect time. You fast forward to the end of the season, Arizona tried to get a deal done with Jed Fish and his agent for him to stay in Tucson long term. And unfortunately, in the state of Arizona, there is a way to get around it, but by state law, you only are allowed to offer 5 years, $5 million per year. So you can't exceed that amount. They had the offer on the table. They had the money raised for the assistant coaches, and Jed kept on pushing it off. And eventually it led to him signing with Washington. I don't know if it was a surprise move, but definitely one that everybody around the athletic department was kind of prepared for by the end of the season. And that takes us into the transition of the Brent Brennan era. Arizona moved quickly. He was able to get his staff together and really keep that core group of guys to stay in Tucson, which was highly important.
Can you tell us a little more about Brent Brennan? I know he had an Arizona tie back, in 2000 or close to then, and then what really were some attention-getting hires as far as the offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator. I mean, he's taken over a program with a lot of momentum and some really good football players on the roster. So can you tell us some about what you're anticipating in year one?
Yeah, giving a little background to Brent Brennan, he was initially thought to be the next Arizona head coach after the Kevin Sumlin era. He was in line for the coaching job. Arizona rotated to Jed Fish, and so that went and so Arizona was very familiar with Brent Brennan, and so is Dave Hickey, the former athletic director. So they're able to move quickly there. Dwayne Aquina was off to Texas after the end of the season, but that connection with Brennan and the Dick Tomey era and just those group of guys, Aquina wanted to stay and kind of make his own mark on the program as a defensive coordinator again. And, he's a guy that loved Tucson. He loves Austin. He didn't want to move, and he had a good group of guys on the defense coming back, so they were able to keep him. But, one of the other major hires, like you brought up, is Dino Babers from Syracuse. They coach together underneath Tomey. He's a Tomey guy. They know each other very well. So once he was let go at Syracuse, that was one of the first phone calls Brent Brennan made, and it was a perfect match. They just had to get some finances situated, and now they have their 2 top assistant coaches in place, and really a coaching staff full of well-respected guys, from Alonzo Carter to Josh Oglesby. There's a lot of well-respected guys offensively and defensively that are on this coaching staff.
Okay, tell me how to say his name correctly, but you have arguably, I'm going to call him T-Mac because I don't want to mess up his first name, but you arguably have, if not the top wideout in the country, one of, and I think thought to be a first-round draft pick. Take me through the dynamic of T-Mac, who Noah Fafita will, throw to quite a bit this year. He's 6'3", 210 pounds, had a phenomenal year last year. Just kind of take me through the dynamic of him as a number one wideout and a clear-cut first-team all-conference guy.
Yeah, Tetsuya McMillan is a very interesting guy. Kind of a under-the-radar star in terms of, his personality on the team. You wouldn't look at him as a guy that is about to be a first-round draft pick just by the way he handles his business. He's a team-first guy, and really that group of guys, Tetsuya McMillan, Noah Fafita, Jacob Manu, and Keon Burnett, those are the Servite guys, and they all came to Arizona in that 2022 class. Without Noah Fafita, there is no T-Mac, and without T-Mac, I don't know how this roster looks. But T-Mac has been everything he has promised to be in terms of signing as a 5-star recruit out of high school. I had the fortunes of covering Bijan Robinson when I worked at All Sports Tucson, and he was one of the best high school talents I've ever seen in my life. Tetsuya McMillan is right up there with him. I mean, that's how good this guy is. It's hard to slow him down. I think the only thing that really slows him down is when he makes a little bit of a mistake on a route or something like that. But as he's progressed, to me, he's shown that he is the number one receiver in the country, and I think he's a guy that will be a top 10 draft pick.
Wow. Curious to see what he's looking like in the Big 12 conference.
Good luck, Braylon Lux. That's Tech's top corner. Yeah. So
opposing defensive backs better take note.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm curious, Troy. We're visiting with Troy Hutchison of GoAZCats.com. Troy, as we get into this Big 12 era, I'm wondering what the pulse of the fan base has been. I think when we were, kind of anticipating from afar, potentially some moves out Pac-12 way as far as programs being on the move, it seemed like Arizona was one of those sort of at the forefront, maybe just behind Colorado or right there with them, that, there was a lot of indication that, a move was coming. So I don't know, leadership may have seen it and been okay with it earlier than the fan base. Sometimes it's vice versa, where the fans are ready and leadership is kind of stomping on the brakes. But what's the feel for being in the Big 12 conference, whether from a football or a basketball perspective, you think, for most Wildcat fans? First, today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Never sweat buying tickets to your favorite events again with Gametime. It's always a breeze using the Gametime app, where you're going to find the best last-minute deals. And I love being able to scout out a view from any seat before pulling the trigger. And, of course, it's always at the lowest price, guaranteed. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it begins, which means you can finish off that last beer at the tailgate at your own pace, because Gametime is the place to find last-minute seats to any event. They give you the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets, but not just fast and easy, also secure and simple to use. So right now, download the Gametime app and create an account and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today for last-minute tickets at the lowest price, guaranteed.
Yeah, I think going back to the move itself, Arizona was one of those schools that gave the Pac-12 every opportunity it could till the last day. The day that Washington and Oregon moved on to the Big Ten, that was the moment that Arizona said, okay, that's enough. They wanted to stay with Arizona State and Utah in the Pac-12 and try to make it work. They loved the conference. They loved, regionally how it fit. But after that happened, they just couldn't wait anymore, and I fully understand why. They went to the Big 12. But the mood around the fan base, I think there's some excitement, but there's also a little bit of, I don't want to say sadness, but a little bit of that. You've been in a conference since 1978. You're used to those opponents. You're used to traveling for those events and going to California, going to Seattle. So a little bit somber on that end, but the opportunity to be I don't want to say one of the top tier teams in the Big 12, but definitely one of the teams that can compete for a Big 12 title. Arizona fans are excited about that. And then basketball wise, to me, this Big 12 could rival the old school Big East. It's going to be a gauntlet night in and night out. You look at the Pac-12 over the last several years, it's not the Pac-12 / Pac-10 that everybody grew up with, UCLA, Arizona, Stanford, Washington, Oregon. It's kind of been down. Arizona's kind of held its own in the Pac-12 and held the torch for them. UCLA's been good every now and then, but the rest of the conference just really hasn't been up to par. So this is going to be a great measuring stick for Arizona in this first year of the Big 12.
Yeah, Troy, it is a bloodbath on the hardwood. I see that up close and personal with the Texas Tech basketball team. And just tell your guys there in Tucson, they don't call anything. It's just So make sure Tommy Lloyd's guys are aware. It's very physical, and it takes a toll. Take us through the dynamic of, because there's two ways to look at this. Jed Fish leaves and goes to Washington. There's some guys that follow, Jonah Coleman, some defensive linemen, and a host of others. And then Brent Brennan comes in and he brings several guys from San Jose State. So there's kind of, that. But how much did it sting the guys that did depart and followed Coach Fish to Seattle?
I think the rest of the team, when they decided, and when I say they, I mean Noah Fafita, Tetero McMillan, Jacob Manu, and Jonas Savinea, the left tackle on the roster, when they decided that they were going to stay in Tucson, they were able to convince the rest of their teammates, the rest of their friends and family to stay as well. I think anybody that's familiar with Polynesian families and ties, they're very close-knit, and that's just how that was going to roll. During that time, Jonah Coleman took a visit to Washington. The team was very supportive. He got the NIL deal. He got, he loved Coach Carter up there. So it was just a perfect fit. I think they weren't surprised. They were happy for him. The one that stings the most, I think, for Arizona is Ephesians Prysock. He was your top cornerback last year, part of one of the best secondaries in the country last season. He tweets out his jersey saying, hey, buy my jersey, help me out with NIL, Arizona fans, come on. They do it, and then the next week he's at Washington. So I think just how that the process went through, really affected Arizona fans of the whole entire jersey sale and all that. I think that just left a bad taste in the mouth. But overall, I think it's been a fine transition. They knew the guys they were going to lose, and most of it was from that 2024 recruiting class that kind of got demolished. But overall, you're able to keep the core. Most of your starting guys are coming back, with an exception of like a Jordan Morgan that's going on to the NFL draft. So you know what you have. You just need to fill the gaps and fill the plugs, and you should be fine.
So as we already mentioned, a great year last year, 10-3. You have the changes that we've already kind of run down. So I'm curious what you think as far as an expectation for this year and in a new conference to boot. Non-conference wise, it's New Mexico, it's Northern Arizona. You actually have Kansas State from the Big 12, though not as a league game. And then you visit Utah. You'll host Texas Tech. You visit BYU, host Colorado, host West Virginia, visit Central Florida. Houston will come to Tucson. You'll visit Texas Christian, and then Arizona State to wrap things all up. So do you think, and I know that fans can be a little out there, so that may be different than reasonable if we're asking about a fan expectation, but what's your expectation after such a great year, but man, now a new conference and obviously a new change in leadership?
Yeah, I think if you had the old regime, it's easy to see Arizona as that 10, maybe even 12 win team next season. But You don't know what this coaching staff's going to be like in the middle of a game, how they adapt to a situation in front of them. You had that Kansas State, Utah. I know there's a bye week right in between there, but that's two tough back-to-back road games. With what Arizona has on the roster right now and not seeing the depth that they brought in the transfer portal, because that was post-spring practice, I think anywhere from 9, maybe even 10 wins is reasonable for Arizona. They'll be right there for a conference championship. Will they get it? Who knows? That's going to come down to how these coaches coach in the middle of a game. But I think the 2 weeks to watch out for are that Kansas State and Utah. If you could split that, even though Kansas State isn't a conference game, you get one of those games, I think Arizona has a chance to win the conference. But if you get swept there, then you're looking at a tough road, and that 8 to 9 win mark is really where you probably will be.
Troy, two-part question. Take me through why is the Utah fan base so outspoken about whether the league or that they're going to win the deal? Are you laughing? Explain to us that dynamic. Casey and I have talked about it a lot on our shows and things like that as we look at the league. And then 2, was there anybody, because you're going to miss 5 different programs, is there anybody that you wish was on the schedule that's not out of Iowa State, Baylor, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, and Kansas? But anyway, so just a couple questions there, schedule related.
Yeah, so we'll go with the schedule one first. I think Oklahoma State would have been an interesting matchup just because, back in the Stoops era, they played each other, I think, 3 years in a row at one point. I think Rich Rod finished it off the last year. But that was always fun to see those matchups, even though Oklahoma State beat Arizona, I think, 30-10 in the bowl game, 30-something to 14 on the road.
And Sonny Dykes wasn't he a coordinator on those teams, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was the 09 offense coordinator in the Holiday Bowl. And then I don't know if he was there for the 2010 game against Oklahoma State. I think he left the next year, but he was right around that same time frame and definitely had a replacement that had the same mindset as well. And Kansas would have been an interesting matchup, given that Kansas's coach was in this conversation for the Washington job as well, and just seeing how everything played out. I think that would have been intriguing. But in terms of the Utah fan base, I've been in journalism 6-7 years, so I've seen them my whole entire time as a journalist in the Pac-12. But as a fan, when I was born and raised here in Tucson, I remember when they joined the Pac-12. And to me, it's somewhat of and again, Utah football is great and Utah basketball is improving, but it reminds me of a small school mentality. We got to show everybody that we're this great school, great program, and we take everything very offensive, and we're going to be very vocal on social media. I think it's a defense mechanism coming from the Mountain West, but I don't know. That's my take.
Well, we're used to Longhorns and Aggies and all kinds of shenanigans too, whether it's defense mechanism or just stupidity. It doesn't really, but yeah, it's clearly made a lot of people pay attention to Utah, maybe that otherwise wouldn't have. So I think it's pretty fascinating. But you have a better feel for that than we would. So I was just curious on your take. But yeah, that's all I have for Troy.
Well, I was curious because we did talk Sun Devil football not too long ago, and we asked about the rivalry with Arizona. As a conference, the Big 12 is looking for interesting beef-filled matchups, and it kind of seems like that's going to be one that we'd like to add along with, say, Utah and BYU. But how much do Wildcat fans hate the Sun Devils, or is it more tilted from an Arizona State perspective?
No, I think the interesting part of Arizona versus ASU, the rivalry, it is mostly about the football game. It's not only about the football game. It's Tucson versus Phoenix. It's the South versus North in a sense of people from Phoenix think they're superior than people from Tucson, and Tucsonans don't like that very much. And so when that matchup happens, it's almost like a state fair. That stadium's sold out every single time. A lot of heated conversations. And it's funny because you'll have families where there's Sun Devil fans and Arizona fans as well. And
Sure.
at least growing up here in Tucson, you don't think highly of ASU fans. And I'm sure it's vice versa on the other end. But football-wise, it's going to be one of the top rivalries in the Big 12, along with BYU, Utah. Basketball, Arizona really doesn't care about ASU. The rival is UCLA. And that's why they're putting together the schedule to set up non-conference games with UCLA. You got to beat teams to have it be a rivalry, and the fact of the matter is ASU basketball just isn't very good.
Is there like a cool name for the Arizona State football game? Like, we have the Holy
Territorial
War
Cup, right?
Oh, the Territorial. Okay,
Is that right?
Okay.
The Territorial Cup is the trophy, and then the side name of it is the Duel in the Desert.
Okay. Duel in the Desert. That's
good
what I was
to know.
looking for. So
We got to make a note. Yeah, and we're looking forward to, obviously, from a Big 12 perspective, I'm sure Arizona and Kansas will develop into a tremendous basketball series as we get that one off and running. But Troy, appreciate the insight, man. He's Troy Hutchison of GoAZCats.com. You can find him on Twitter at GoAZCats.com, also at THutch1995 if you're looking there on Twitter. Man, appreciate the time today, and hopefully we can visit again as we get down the road and into the season. Appreciate it.
Anytime, guys. Have a good day.
We appreciate Troy's time. It was great to visit with him. Again, you can find his work at GoAZCats.com, part of the Rivals Network. And Chris, obviously, from a football perspective, you would not necessarily think Arizona State as the first big prizes as far as new members of the Big 12 Conference, even though the Wildcats did have a great year last year, and maybe we'll be able to sustain that. But excited to have Arizona in the league. There's a whole lot that they're bringing to the table, and that's an understatement from a basketball perspective. But also, I think from Tech's perspective, some natural geography here and even some border conference history that we shared once upon a time. So one of the more intriguing additions to the Big 12, to say the least.
Yeah, and my favorite memory of Tucson is no, I don't have any favorite memories of Tucson. I was there a few years ago. Alan Bowman actually got hurt, and that the last time I was there. Yeah, bad deal. Kevin Sumlin was still the coach. Yeah, it's interesting listening to Troy. They do have one of the top quarterback / wide receiver combos in the country, certainly in the Big 12. And I think it's interesting listening to him talk about that, almost expect 9 to 10 wins. I mean, that's if you go look at Arizona football, they had not been very good at all until last year. And I guess with the bulk back, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of what reality is, because I think you could hear similarities between Iowa State folks, West Virginia folks, Utah folks, Kansas State folks, Kansas folks. I think Texas Tech, Central Florida fans feel like, okay, we can push through and get to that 8-9 win territory. And then you have Arizona saying, hey, man, 9 or 10 at minimum, right? Or that's the way it should be. Math, there's a thing called math, and there's games, and not everybody can be in that sweet spot. So, but they are clearly one of the teams that I think deserves to be in some sort of conversation as far as like conference favorites. I don't know if favorite is the right word, but clearly in that, on the edge of that combo based on what they did last year. A lot is back. They did lose some, but you have a really, it was the Pac-12 freshman of the year, Noah Fafita. So, but it was fun to talk to him and be the first conference road game and a monster game for Texas Tech. But appreciate everybody joining us today. It's fun to kind of talk through some of these new opponents that are now conference mates and all those things. It's like handshake emoji, right? It's like, hey, good to have you. Yeah, well, good to be here. That kind of deal. So as now we're either stuck together or pleased to be, with one another. But keep hope alive. Enjoyed it. Thanks for the time, Cowan. Appreciate you doing this with me.
That's right. Appreciate you as well, and appreciate Troy's time. Again, find him at GoAZCats.com, part of the Rivals Network. For Chris, I'm Casey. Appreciate you guys being out there, and make sure you get subscribed if you're not already on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts so you never miss an episode. And we'll hope to see you back for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.